right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our Wednesday webinar for the month of June. Today, we have Matt Harwell joining us today. Thank you very much. I'm just going to say a few quick things really quick before we get started here. I just wanted to mention that we have registration live for our Be the Difference conference in Knoxville, Tennessee, which is going to be on January 28th through 31st of 2024. So we have early bird. Oh, hi, Halcyon. So we have early bird pricing going until September 15th, and I will leave the link in the chat box for you guys to visit later if you want to see that. And then the next thing I wanted to mention is that we also are doing a promotion right now on our brand new course catalog. So it's normally $79 a year per person, but we're actually doing a $20 off discount right now if you're registered, excuse me, by the end of July. So it'll be $59 per year. So I'll also leave the enrollment link in the chat box as well for that. So I'll let Matt take it from here.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It's exciting to be here with people. And I know those of you, if you're not here live, the cool part is you'll get the recording after the fact. So those of you that are registering, please still, if you can't be here live, watch it later. Again, thank you to the Denise Amber Lee Foundation. I know getting to see most of your guys' team recently at NINA is always a blessing for me. It's exciting to see the amazing work you guys are doing and to hear, just the cool discount with that catalog and everything too, with all the training you guys are putting out. So today, I just want to kind of focus on, and we're going to spend roughly this next hour. If you have questions or whatever it may be, please throw it in the chat. I'm sure one of us can kind of monitor that, and we'll kind of go through there. Again, there's that registration link to get signed up for Be the Difference. So don't miss out on that. It's going to be awesome from what I hear. But today I just wanted to specifically take some time to talk about change. And I think for me personally, and I think in the world of public safety telecommunications, really just in the world of being humans, change is a part of everything that we do. And I think people have different levels of comfort with change. And obviously there's some ebb and flow to that. But today I just want to really kind of specifically give you 3 significant takeaways that will hopefully help you be better equipped and excited when change comes in life. So we're going to talk about being changed. We're going to talk about change, but we're going to really talk about being changed for the better. Again, my name is Matt Harwell. I work at the Laramie County Sheriff's Office in Fort Collins, Colorado. So just real quickly, I want to start. I did not hear this quote myself, but a friend of mine did. And I know this year at Navigator, it was in Denver, one of the presenters was talking about dispatchers in general and said they really seem to dislike 2 things. They really dislike change, but at the same time, they also dislike the status quo. And we know as humans, like we kind of just naturally seem built for change. And there's that constant evolutionary type process of changes happening all around us. But when we think about it as dispatchers or those in public safety telecommunications or just public safety in general, we know that change is tough, but also the status quo is tough. We live in a world, if you were at NINA, if you were at Navigator, if you're going to be at APCO, if you've been at Be the Difference, you know that there is constantly new things, whether it be in the field of training or quality assurance, quality improvement, just even the stuff that happens at the console. Change is constantly coming down the pike at us. I want to specifically just start. We're just going to take a few minutes, and maybe even if you guys are willing to jump over into the chat for this, I Googled what are some of the worst changes of the decade. And I'm hoping most of you who are attending from 2010 to 2020, you were alive during that time. If you're attending and you weren't alive during that time, kudos. And I don't know why you're here, but I'm glad you're here. Anyways, worst changes of the decade. I'm just going to read through this list, and I want you guys to just highlight is there something missing? Which of these sticks out to you? These are the things that USA Today kind of highlighted. Social media addiction, the opioid epidemic, student loan crisis, box office revenue. Happiness is one of the worst changes, and that was kind of a unique one to read about. Privacy in general, I think privacy changed with technology and a lot of breaches of privacy. We saw some changes in that decade. Global warming, mania for selfies. Again, it's what it is. I'm guilty, I suppose. Air pollution, work culture, obesity rates, life expectancy, income inequality, diabetes rates, media, news sources, just all of that we're inundated with. The public infrastructure was another one of the worst changes. I mean, I think it's just coming. Robocalls, there's just any of those spam robo type calls that are just kind of the bane of my existence. Air travel, those of you who maybe were coming back from Nina got delayed, even trying to get out of DFW or out of Love, there was some delays. Political division, and then hate crimes. So just if you're willing, and those of you who are around your computer live in the chat, is there anything missing? What are some of the changes that have seemed horrible in your life up to this point? So throw some of that in the chat, and we'll kind of just go from there if we have 2 seconds. Any thoughts, anything that's missing, or any of these really stick out to you? The return, Hassan, the return of jean skirts. I feel that. I know what you're talking about. Yeah, it's weird, and finding the right one all the time. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, return of the jean skirt. So if anything else kind of pops in, please don't hesitate sharing this. Oh, work ethic. Thank you. I think that, and that probably kind of dovetails on that work culture thing as a whole. And I would say even post 2020, kind of post COVID, some of that work ethic, work culture, things are just still rapidly changing. Unemployment, homelessness, these are phenomenal things. Fear of being near people. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's still unique to me. I went to a restaurant even today, and they still boldly have, a sign on their door. And this is, as a private business, it's their thing, but like masks are required. But even inside the organization of like restaurants, they don't really have sit down options anymore, but it's just really spaced out. Taking responsibility for actions. Yeah. These are huge. And I think hopefully all of what we're looking at, there we go. Rochelle, if I pronounce that correctly, just kind of highlighting what Marilu said, and that decline of professionalism, right? Increased sensitivity to opinions. These are phenomenal things. Thank you so much, David, for sharing that. I think for us, what the chat is making pretty evident, and what this list, even from USA Today, said, is change is not always going well in our world. And we as human beings don't always deal with change well. So again, we want to be the most impactful people in our lives. Like our goal as human beings, and especially in the industry of public safety telecommunications, or public safety in general, what that looks like for us is just like what the foundation is doing. We want to be the difference. And oftentimes to be the difference, we have to be the best. We have to really understand what change is and understand that change can be for the better. Thanks, Anthony, for that, to do less or do more with a less mentality, right? When you talk about staffing, retention, just finances, there's just an inherent requirement that we're having to do much more. We're expected, we have more expectations, but we don't always have more staffing or more money or more resources. So today, like I said, we're going to talk about 3 significant things. But before we start, what comes to mind when you think about change? Take 10, 15 seconds. If you've got paper in front of you, jot it down. When you think about change in your own personal life, your own personal context, your work, your family, whatever it may be, what comes to mind when you think about change? It could be emotions. It could be an impending change that you're a little bit nervous about. And so maybe it's not so much the emotion, but just what does that change entail? What comes to your mind? Just take a few seconds, because as we work through this today, thanks, Sherry, fear, I want you to really capitalize on something as we're talking about these 3 points that you can tangibly apply these things to. Most of what we're going to be talking about is change when it involves other people. But I think even as human beings, individually, some of dealing with those emotions and understanding what that change brings is going to prepare us to deal with fear. It's going to prepare us to deal with the excitement that change can bring, the loss of control, the challenges, all these things you guys are putting in the chat. Wonderful. So keep thinking about that. Find those words, those feelings, those emotions, a specific change that's coming that you can really hold on to while we talk about things today. And let's jump into it. Today, like I said, the points that I want you to leave with is I want us to really look at what it looks like to build a powerful group. And I think oftentimes one of the disservices we do to ourselves is we try to deal with change either individually or the organizations we work for. It's all about one person and we're just left to aimlessly follow that person, right? we're not a part of the change process. We're not clued in. We're not communicated with. We don't understand any of the wins that are working towards the big final change process, right? So building a powerful group. Sometimes it's called a guiding coalition. And a lot of the content today, I would be remiss to not mention this, is if you've never read the book, it's called Leading Change by John Kotter. Kotter's with a K, Kotter. He really lays out these 8 steps. These 3 are kind of drawn from that. We're going to build on that context and try to apply it to our lives. But John really recognizes that this guiding coalition is one of the most important things at the beginning of the process. So we're going to talk about that kind of more towards the beginning. More in the middle, the meat of the process is about communication. If you've ever been a part of an after action, a debrief, anything of the like, time and time again, regardless of how flawless we as public safety telecommunications professionals may be, communication, whether it be with field responders or just even in our relationships, right? Communication is something that we tend to have a misstep with at times, especially when we're communicating about the change that's coming. So we're going to really highlight, what does it look like to talk about communicating the pending change? And then finally, we want to wrap up today with really focusing on these short-term wins. I think one of the realities is that when we think about change, we're so goal-oriented and goal-focused that sometimes we forget to celebrate the little breadcrumb stepping stone, just the parts of the puzzle that lead to that final outcome. We get too focused on ensuring that that final goal is met. And what that does to us is oftentimes we get discouraged, we get frustrated, we get angry, we get, short-tempered, because change isn't something that usually happens overnight. And when change takes a while, and we're not focusing on some of those short-term wins, we're not really keeping our eye on the actual prize, and we're not celebrating the really positive things that are happening along the way. So let's jump into it. Some of you know, and Halcyon for sure knows, that a dear friend of mine, really, when it comes to talking about building a powerful group, she heavily emphasizes that teamwork really makes the dream work. And if there's one thing that you walk away with today, changed for the better, is recognizing that change is always accomplished best in the context of that corporate. As human beings, we're designed, and I get people have different levels of comfort, whether, if you're more introverted versus extroverted. I'm not saying that you always have to approach things in this really corporate manner, but big change is always accomplished better by building that powerful team. Surrounding yourselves, if you're kind of that leader, with people that are supporting you, and making that progress move forward. So here's what I want to talk about today when we talk about building a powerful team. First and foremost, we've all seen it time and time again where a change process is kind of lined out to only happen with like one really highly visible and important individual. And they're making progress, the change is happening. But if that person has a misstep, they have an injury, they get sick, they get ill, they're not communicating that change, they end up leaving an organization, those change processes come to like just a flipping halt, right? The brakes are pumped, everything comes to a screeching halt, and all of these things that we were talking about earlier that kind of impact especially our feelings about change, anticipation, challenge, loss of control, excitement, fear, when all of a sudden that change process that you've really come to terms with those emotions comes to a screeching halt. You talked about anticipation, the unknowns, the stressors about that change. They don't really decrease just because that person is not a part of the process. They usually ramp up. So because major change is oftentimes so difficult to accomplish, we really have to recognize that a powerful force of that corporate is required to sustain the process. Change processes, again, aren't things that happen overnight, and they're not things that happen quickly or easily. So it's going to take that powerful group, that guiding coalition. It's always needed. And one of the things that we want to recognize is that that powerful group, that team, that guiding coalition needs to include the following things, for lack of a better term. You've got to have the right composition of people. You have to have a high level of trust. You also need to understand a shared objective, right? And I think that seems pretty logical. For most of us being professionals in your industry, I presume that seems like, well, duh, that's like a no-brainer. But the reality is, To build that type of team is always easier said than done. But since it is an essential part of the early stages of any efforts or any change process, whether it's a restructure, it's a new technology, a re-engineering of a current technology, or a re-engineering of a process, a retooling of a set of strategies, right? Any of that change, it's essential that this powerful group is there at the beginning. And contrary to the powerful group are really two avenues that organizations oftentimes go down and individuals oftentimes go down. We talked about this one earlier. It's either they go it alone and they become very isolated and they don't build that team, and that's going to create one set of issues, or they try to build a team, but they're essentially running on empty. They don't have the credibility. They haven't taken the time to look for the right composition. They haven't established that trust, and there's really no shared objective. So if you don't have those three baseline factors, even if you have that team and that guiding coalition, that powerful group that you've built, you really have no ability to make a positive change process happen. And remember, our goal is to be changed for the better. We want to see change be about the better, not just good, not just satisfactory, but the better, right? Because that's part of the process that we go through when we're making a difference each and every day. Today's world, as I kind of segue into this, I think about when we even go back to that slide and we think about all those horrible changes from 2010 to 2020, right? The world we live in is rapidly changing. The pace at which, again, if you were at any of the recent national conferences or just even being in our own context, we know that there's new technologies, there's new things each and every day. Even going in restaurants nowadays, you go to some fast food restaurants and they're changing their process because of things like COVID and other things, but just even the process to order or the means for ordering and how things are done when it comes to paying for things, right? It's all about changed processes. So the world around us demands that any new process, any new change be done well, because it's probably going to happen at a more rapid pace than it has in the past. Historically, change, and when you look at some of the change advocates going way back in time, those who have really looked at change models, they're starting to see a recognition that a slower progression used to be a part of change. You can kind of squeak by without some of the things we're talking about today, just by virtue of having a strong enough personality, or having enough finances as a corporation or an organization, or just having enough people who were gullible to kind of just blindly follow you as their leader, right? But we live in a different world today. And to keep pace with change, we have to build that powerful group. We have to really communicate that pending change, and we need to celebrate those short-term wins. Again, historically, team wasn't always about team like it is today. When we talk about and have a true and accurate understanding of what it means to be a team today, it's what most of us probably desire and what we look for in our own teams and our own organizations that we're a part of. It's much more of a collaborative, coexisting type reality. It's not about this rank and file. Team in the past, when we talk about change, was about a CEO who was assigned a team of people. And it was all about that hierarchy, right? Or maybe it was more specifically about a boss and his 8 direct reports. And we recognize that those direct reports, and even when we're talking about generations, some of our older generational cohort partners, some of the boomers and stuff, that's just what they were used to, and that's what they're comfortable with, right? Change for them was, you tell me what to do, I do it, and it's going to happen. But that's not the world we live in today. Change today, again, comes from the recognition that it's got to be a collaborative effort. It's got to be about a group, a powerful group, a guiding coalition of people that helps make this change happen. So when we talk about team, what do we have to have, right? I think one of the unique things is, for me personally, I'm a big proponent of recognizing that in the industry and in the world we live, if we don't understand what team means, we're not living out our best lives. We're not living out our best lives as employees, as human beings, as part of the society we live in. So team needs to consist of a few important things. It's about positional power. So this powerful group, this guiding coalition, this team we're building has to have people who do have that positional power in your organization. It's got to be those leaders and those managers. And we're going to separate leadership and management a little bit today as we talk about this concept. But positional power is extremely important. If you don't have some of the key leaders in your organization or your team, your entity, whatever group you're working with to instill and further this process of change, if you don't have those key leaders, you're already kind of between a rock and a hard place. So oftentimes, building that sense of urgency, even before we build this team, is about helping really set that vision to those key leaders in your organization. So you've got to have your team be involved with people who have positional power. The next thing is you have to have people who have expertise. And I think expertise is something nowadays that we kind of miss, even when we're looking at some of these, the unknowns, the stressors, the anticipation, the challenges, the loss of control, excitement, fear, the things you guys threw into the chat box. When we talk about expertise, the expertise for our team could be someone whose goal is purely to be there as that the person who recognizes some of these tools that the change process is going to have on the team. The expertise is not only about the change that you're trying to instill. If it's a new technology, people who know and have been an early adopter of the technology. But the other flip side of that is you're going to have people who aren't really early adopters, who aren't on board with this change process right away. And they're going to have those unknowns. They're going to be worried about the stressors. They may be straight up people who are resistant to the change process. And we'll talk about some means to deal with that later. But they may be people who their goal in life is to halt this change process you're going about. So you've got to have people who have full-blown expertise, not only about the change process, but about human nature and the ability to kind of have that intuitive aspect of this is the change we're working on. And we need to be cognizant that humans are a part of this change process. And if we forget that it's humans and not just machines that we're trying to force along, we really do harm to our team. You've got to have credibility. And we kind of talked about this earlier. Credibility is one of the big things that goes into even being able to make this change process happen. Credibility comes through really that level of trust. And as we build that, the right composition, that trust, that shared objective, credibility is a piece of that. Credibility is where people, and it's not about trusting or knowing that you are always the best at something, but it's that you have a proven track record of caring for people and being willing to help see a change process through. So that credibility comes in the form of every single individual that you bring onto this powerful group. Credibility is also something that can change over time. And it's also something that we as humans, we want to just be cognizant of, because someone may really have credibility in one change process. It's a new technology, right? We're bringing video into 911, for instance, and someone's really, really passionate. They've built their credibility as someone who knows what's going on and they're able to really teach it well. Whereas if we're talking about training or a CTO process, there may be, and making some changes to that, we may have people who don't really understand adult learning or some of those concepts. So they don't have the credibility that's necessary to really help impact positively and make a difference for that change process. And then the final piece is leadership. And this is what I said earlier. We're going to talk about leadership and management as kind of two distinctly different things. You have to have both in change processes. We're going to talk about that in a moment. And we're really going to wrap up with that. But leadership is vitally important. And leadership and management must work in tandem. They've got to be on the same page. Having strong leadership and strong management going into any change process instantly sets you up for success and sets you up to be successful. So we've talked a little bit today, and I get some of this is rapid. We've talked about what some of these, the foundational building blocks of this powerful group, this guiding coalition, this really great team we're needing to work at looks like. So what's the right size? What do you think dictates the right size? Oftentimes, the right size to this powerful group that we're building is determined and dictated. It's all relevant to the size of the organization, right? So I want you to understand that as we talk about some of these processes, it's instantly going to be scaled, and it grows too over time. A change process, as you build this powerful group, it may really start with just 2 or 3 people, regardless of the size of an organization. 2 or 3 people who are really rallying around a change process and recognizing, hey, this change is necessary, it's needed. They've really helped build that sense of urgency. They're starting to see the vision and knowing that we need to work on this together. They may be those people who are coming together. They might make up the right composition early on. They may have that established level of trust with one another, and they may be the ones who have the right ability to really work towards that process of recognizing what is a shared objective we're working at. So they may have already started to set that objective early on. But those 2 to 3 people can't do it alone. It's no different than that one person trying to do it alone. They're going to quickly grow. And oftentimes we're going to see the 2 to 3 may grow to 6. And as a larger organization, sometimes these powerful groups, these coalition organizations that are really working on it, it may be as many as 20 to 50 people that are necessary to be a part of this powerful group. And again, it goes back to having the right composition, the right amount of influence, that level of trust and credibility within your organization, and then ultimately the ability to understand that shared objective and really see it and rally it through as we carry that to the end. But when we talk about things that we're building, there's always things we should avoid too, right? The biggest thing we need to avoid are bringing people onto our team that really fall into 2 categories. Again, I would say at some level, both of these are things that can maybe be trained or taught, but I think some of them sadly are inherent. So I would urge you to be rather aware of people who fall into these 2 categories. And one of the big things that we see in change processes and change management and being a change agent yourself is that if these people creep in, they can instantly sabotage and essentially torpedo any positive change that you may be making in your organization, your life, your group, your team, whatever it may be. So here's the 2 things you want to avoid, and write these down. Keep track of these. First and foremost is someone who is just has an ego that's too big for the team, right? In a powerful group and building that powerful group, there is absolutely no room for that ego. It goes back to these leaders who have kind of tried to individually change or bring about change, right? I mean, we can look in time. There's people like you look at the Walmart Corporation and the Waltons, like he was a pretty influential leader. You look at Apple and you look at Steve Jobs, and we know the power and the influence he had there. But the totality of what those organizations was able to do wasn't always about that single individual. Rather, it was about those individuals building a team around them who was able to carry things on long after they've been gone, right? But there's no space for egos. The problem with people who have those egos when we bring them onto the team is they ultimately, we say we have no space for people with those egos, but really what it comes down to is someone who kind of exists in that egotistical realm. They really have no room for anyone else. And inherently, they are going to work against building up this powerful group, this team that's going to make change successful in your organization. And trust me, you're not going to be able to be changed or make change for the better. The other piece is, and this is Cotter's word from his text, but he says people with egos and then snakes. And we know what snakes are, right? We know those people in our lives. Ultimately, they're the ones who their purpose in any organization is they are a creator of mistrust, and they are also someone who desires to kill teamwork at every single opportunity. And sadly, those are the people who, when we talk about some of these stressful things that come into our minds, when we think about change, if we were honest with ourselves and thought back about change processes we've been a part of in the past, some of the fears, and I'm really will only speak for myself now, some of the fears, the challenge, the loss of control, the excitement I personally feel at times is because I've been a part of change processes where someone with an ego or someone who is a snake that was trying to really bring about mistrust and create mistrust and kill teamwork just destroyed me as an individual. My own life, my own context, I can think of really specific examples, and I'm sure you can as well. So we've got to remove those people, right? To really build this powerful group, this team, We've got to make sure that those egos and those snakes aren't there. And both of them, their goal is to entice in some way to join the coalition. They oftentimes are trying to get into the group because that's just who they inherently desire to be. They want to be a part of that group, and that's what kind of fuels their ego or fuels their ability to create that mistrust or kill teamwork. So be cognizant of that. Are there any thoughts? And throw stuff into the chat, please. Don't let me ramble. If there's anything that comes up, you guys have questions, thoughts, wonderings, throw it in there. Either myself or someone can kind of call that out. But as we kind of wrap up, when we're looking at the idea of building a powerful group, teamwork is ultimately going to come about in various ways, regardless of how the teamwork is to come to be or how that team is developed. Like I said earlier, trust is important regardless. Trust is so vital to overcome the nervous anticipation, the loss of control. It helps us understand the challenges that are coming with the stress of change, those fears. When we have that base level idea of trust in our organizations, we're going to already be set for success. That's a great question, David. And I think, can management be the snake? Yeah. And again, I think it goes back to historically, management, probably when we look at some of the bigger organizations, Fortune 500, be that they preached and harped so much on management, it's a forgotten term. And management controlling people. So by virtue, it's about really dictating and creating mistrust and kind of killing that teamwork, because it goes back to the idea of that boss and his 8 or her 8 direct reports, right? And they just blindly follow that person. So hopefully that kind of helps there with that, David. I think for sure management can be the snake, and it's one thing corporately it can be. So that's why having good leaders who we can trust, who kind of really build that leadership core, is going to be vitally important as well. Alfonso, that's a great question too. How do we deal with change in social media? Honestly, what I want to do with social media, communication, let's draw that out there more, if you're fine waiting for just a moment, Alfonso. But one of the things too, as we wrap up this idea of teamwork, and again, David, thank you for bringing up about what management looks like, is team building has to be fostered somehow. And so if management isn't doing it, sometimes it's the need of those leaders and having that strong leadership core to bring about that change. So to build teamwork, it's going to come in these various, but team building has to happen, and it's more important with bigger challenges, right? So teamwork and team building is going to come through doing intentional team building exercises. It may mean that you have to get offsite. It may mean that you have to intentionally set aside time and money to really recognize that for this change process to work that we're looking forward to down the line, we have to ensure that we have the trust and the teamwork established at the foresight. So as we kind of track through what it looks like to build this powerful group, it starts with team building. From team building, we start to see that transition to trust. With trust, we start to see that transition then to that shared objective that is very, very important for building a powerful group and recognizing the change process. And ultimately, that shared objective gets all of us landed on that common goal. This powerful group that you're building, this guiding coalition, these agents of change that are coming together, it's all about having that common goal. If we're not all oriented in the same direction, we are going nowhere. And if you've ever tried to watch a team of horses lead a carriage, and one starts to pull a little bit off of direction, or a team of sled dogs and one's pulling a little bit out of sorts, it quickly causes more work for everyone else. So we've got to ensure that we have that common goal and we're all focused and working towards that same common goal. So to summarize this first point real briefly, we have to have the right people. We have to have that we have to have the right people. We have to establish trust, and we ultimately have to land on that common goal. But that's not all that it seems. And I'm just going to look at David's comment real quick. Yeah, that's a very, very, bold, but probably a really honest thing to bring to the forefront, David. So thanks for pointing that out for us. And a lot of that goes back to, honestly, when we think about those managers, is they're not recognizing, they're usually not communicating any of that change. And that ultimately is what brings about that discord, right? The discord they're trying to bring about, they easily do by not building the right teams, or by building teams of people who are not going to be very powerful. They're going to essentially be those kind of dead in the water teams, that it's just about that leader and dragging the people behind him or her, right? And at the same time, it's also the reality that, how do I want to say this? They may intentionally not communicate things, right? So this next point that we're going to talk about is communicating that pending change, and they're intentionally keeping things, keeping people out of those communication loops, right? We talked about communication is the one thing in all organizations, any instance, incident, task, whatever it may be, that's oftentimes pointed as the thing that like is kind of the weak point in any process. It's about communicating. And so that's why we're going to draw that out. Ultimately, a failure to communicate, David, to your point, is what really fosters that kind of Munchausen by proxy type situation, right? This sheer kind of grossly needed like support system that's not necessary. It doesn't create an empowering culture, and it doesn't equip or prepare leaders for the future. It's not an infinite mindset when we think about it. And honestly, when we think about the work that the foundation is doing, that type of mentality goes in the face of really being the difference in any organization or process. So great point. Adam, I'm just going to read your comment. Snakes and egos lead to some of the responses we have seen. Absolutely. I don't think fear and uncertainty should be the first response to change. I absolutely agree, right? And again, that's kind of, I hopefully Adam's going to draw that out more for us. But again, yeah, those are the realities that we just get a little bit nervous when we hear the word change at times because of those snakes and really egotistical people we've been exposed to in the past. Great. I'll say a great point. So many management using hiding information as a way to demonstrate power. They're more knowledgeable, right? If you keep your cards close to your chest, you're the only one that really knows what's going on. And then you are in control of releasing those. And I think that goes back, probably, I think it was you, Halcyon, that said it's about that loss of control at times, right? And so when management holds those cards close, they create that. But when we talk about communicating the pending change, what does it look like to not hide that information, to not kind of usurp that power? Because communication is a powerful thing, right? So we're going to talk about some ideas and things that you can apply in your own life that will hopefully help dispel some of those nervous things, that will address the fear, that will address the loss of control, that will bring more people into the realm of understanding the change that's happening. First and foremost, communication has to be simple. Simplicity is important. Live in a world that highly values jargon. I'm a wildland firefighter on the side. I'm also one of our reserve deputies. I was at a wildland firefighter training last night, and even being in the industry, I'm oftentimes frustrated by the number of acronyms that I'm supposed to remember what they mean, right? I could be out on the fire line trying to make the difference of saving communities and people's houses from this wildland fire spreading, and I have to remember what LAL and some of these other acronyms mean and think about the context of what's going on. When we make things simple, and that communication is just without jargon, we really start to better dispel some of those negative emotions that come with change processes. And we help create trust between management and the front line. And that goes back to your point too, Victor, right? That distrust is fostered when people hide information. But when we're willing to be simple and speak our minds, we have the ability to bring the line and management into life together. Another thing is we live in a world where people learn differently. So whether it be examples or metaphors or analogies, right? We need to find ways in our communication to essentially verbalize the picture we want people to see. We have to paint a picture, right? We as change agents and working towards change for the better have to be the Bob Rosses of the change process that we need. We have to describe what we're about to paint in such a way that I can almost envision what that little happy tree is about to look like before I even see what it looks like on the canvas. And our communication has to be done in multiple forms, right? Communication is not just a single email that goes out every Monday morning at 8 a.m. It's got to be in big meetings. It's got to be in small meetings. It's got to be written. It's got to be spoken It's got to be formal. It's got to be informal. Communication has to come in multiple forms. We have to recognize that the people we work with, the people we serve, the people we care about in our teams and organizations, people are going to really digest that communication differently, right? And I think that's one of the things that goes back to building trust between line people and oftentimes management or the leaders in an organization, is knowing that every single opportunity to communicate the pending change was taken. We don't just default to our Monday morning email blast that goes out and it's typed up on Friday afternoon and scheduled to go out on Monday. So any of the things that happened over the weekend, they don't really matter for Monday morning, right? Repetition. This is another thing with communication, and I'm going to just peek over at Tina's point too. There are those in management that attempt to teach and spread information knowledge, but is not accepted or thought to be in my job description. Again, that's a very good point. And a lot of that goes back to that level of trust, I would say, within an organization, and probably the trust and historically some of the things that they've dealt with those managers and leaders in the past. And again, this isn't meant to be something we talk about change that we're saying management's bad. Management and leadership, again, they're both necessary. They have to work in tandem. They're both vitally important. Some of those key leaders to help influence that change and build that powerful team, again, it has to be those people who are those leaders. They're the ones that inherently are coming with that positional power, right, in the structure that we were talking about. But going on, the next point I want to kind of make is we have to really focus on repetition. If you've done anything in life, you know that it takes reps for something to sink in. That's the same with communicating change. Again, it's not a one time and that's all it takes. We have to constantly keep it at the forefront of people's minds. Leadership, and again, this goes back to some of the points you guys have been making about management. Leadership we have to lead by example when it comes to communicating the pending change. And what I mean by that is leading by example, or leadership by example, is about, we can't just give lip service to something and then our behavior shows that we don't really support the vision, right? We've all seen that. Someone will say one thing, yep, I support, and this is the vision, this is where we're going, this is the change we're trying to make, but then their actions and their behaviors run contrary to that. In one breath, they'll say, yeah, I support you, I support this change, I support this new technology, but then their actions are quite the opposite, because it goes back to whether it's that ego or those snakes or just the ability to try to breed some of that mistrust. Their actions and behaviors show differently. Body language is vitally important when it comes to communicating the pending change, and that's a part of leading by example. We want to explain inconsistencies. I think as humans, we know that we're privy to inconsistencies. There's always inconsistencies. There's always going to be gaps in different places where things don't totally line up. And we just need to tackle them kind of head on. Just address those inconsistencies. If you don't address them, they're ultimately going to undermine your credibility, and they're going to kind of sneak in, and they're going to be those weak points in that pending change that's coming. So just address them. Don't be ashamed in that communication to say, I don't have all the answers yet, or to say, I don't have the answer now, but I'm going to find it for you, right? We don't want to make up answers. We don't want to make up reasons, because that then doesn't build or foster that sense of trust, and that too will undermine our credibility. And finally, when we talk about communicating the pending change, we need to recognize that it's a two-way street. There's got to be a give and take. All communication is two ways. As leaders, regardless of what your title or position in your organization is, you are a leader and you are a change agent. With one thing today, teamwork makes the dream work, and you're a part of that teamwork that's making the dream work. You're a change agent. You have influence. You are a leader in your organization. Even if certain people may not recognize you as a leader, you are, and the difference you're going to make starts with you at times. So you've got to be willing to listen, but you also have to be willing to be listened to. Most of us I enjoy talking a lot. You guys are just kind of passively sitting here. Thank you for those that are jumping in on the chat, but I enjoy talking, but I, as a leader, have to also recognize that I have to listen. Listening is oftentimes where we start to see those missteps, or where we need to build more trust, or where we need to help foster and fill in the gap of what this common goal is that's really going to help make the change happen. And all of this communication piece is all of it is focused on recognizing that if we're not willing to communicate something, are we really committed to the change? And I think that's a huge thing that we need to keep in our minds. Thank you, Halcyon. I have never met a stranger. That is a very accurate statement. So any questions or thoughts, throw those in the chat about communicating the pinning change. But I want to make sure that we don't run out of time. And I want to talk about this final point, focusing on the short-term wins. Oftentimes as leaders and change agents, we get really focused on what is the big outcome, right? We know what's the overarching picture, the big goal, where we're going in life, and we can present that vision really, really well. But we end up just dragging people along with us if we're not presenting that vision in a way that really fosters helping celebrate wins along the way and keeps people really focused on the task. It can feel like we're trekking across a desert. I can look across a desert, which is the change process in front of us, and say, there's an oasis. That's the water. That's the watering hole we're heading towards. That's where life is going to be different. But if all they see is grain of sand after grain of sand, and all they feel is blistering heat and the temperature rising, and they're sweating, and they have no water themselves, they're not going to recognize the goal that's there. They're not going to see that common goal as something important. So we help value working towards that common goal and getting our teams to where we need to be, regardless of what our place in that team may be, by really focusing on these short-term wins. Major change always takes time. We've talked about that. We know that. Some are going to be a part of that change process regardless. They're just the people that love and care about you so much that they are going to follow you blindly. And we need those people in our lives. Those people are great for organizations and they're great for our teams. However, others are going to need that encouragement. They're going to need some convincing evidence, right? I'm from Missouri. It's the show me state. I am one of those people that I need to see those breadcrumbs of where we're going. I need to see, and maybe that was an intentional misspeak there, of where we're growing, right? Change is about a growth process. And if I don't understand what that growth process involves, I'm not celebrating the small wins. You think about a physical journey of like weight loss or building muscle, right? If you're not willing to recognize some of the small wins and you only focus on something like the number on a scale, you're missing out on what the true successes that you are having are, right? Maybe it's the ability to run a little faster or walk a little further or having to buy new clothes, whatever it may be, right? It's those short-term wins. And it's the same with any change process. People need that encouragement. They need to be convinced with some of the evidence. And the influence of these short-term wins is significant. They're the things that keep the change trajectory from going high. When you look at organizations who don't celebrate those short wins, there's lots of case studies, and you can find in the literature and in the world of business a lot of differences. When organizations are willing to highlight and recognize those short-term wins, they start to see success of the whole change process continue in a very upward manner. You look at organization A, who doesn't celebrate any of those short-term wins, it's going to kind of peter out and die pretty quickly. You look at organization B, who really recognizes just one short-term win. So they're up, they hit that peak, and they're starting to kind of plateau, but that short-term win is going to keep them going up. But you look at an organization like Organization C, who really, really values focusing on these short-term wins, and it essentially creates this ever-present upward trajectory that's extremely significant when it comes to the change process. And the nature and timing of all of these small wins, these short-term wins, I should say, are really, really important. These short-term wins, what we want to do with them is they have to be visible. We have to point them out. We have to highlight. We have to recognize them, right? We have to see what's going on in life. We also want to recognize that they have to be unambiguous, right? They can't just be something that's kind of like willy-nilly thrown out and we kind of make some connection to it. No, they have to be clearly related to the change process that's going on. So again, nature and timing are vitally important when it comes to this, right, Halcyon? We need, and she specifically, but I think we need to know the why, right? And focusing on these short-term wins and being able to understand through the communication, and then knowing that these short-term wins support the communication that we're seeing, that's all focused on that common goal, is huge and significant. So as we wrap up today, with this point, why short-term wins? Evidence, um, the short-term wins are evidence that the work that the team is putting in is really, really worth it. And I think that's something that's significant. It also is going to reward those important players, those people who are on that powerful group you fostered, that team of change agents, that guiding coalition. It's a means to reward them without having to be something significant financial. It's just sometimes that sheer satisfaction, right? And again, it goes back to the why becomes more prevalent to them because they see it playing out. It also allows us to fine-tune vision when we celebrate and focus on these short-term wins. It helps us fine-tune vision, but also strategy when it comes to change processes. It also allows us, and this goes back to some of the points that those of you have brought up in the chat, is the ability to celebrate short-term wins, and again, communicating those, because we're going to be sharing those, right? And communicating that out. It helps kind of undermine those who are cynics or those who have self-serving resistance type processes, those egotistical kind of snake-oriented people. It really helps undermine any power they may have. And at certain times, it's going to help, and this is just more about the alliteration versus the fact that I like this term, but it helps keep your bosses on board, right? If the boss understands the process because you're highlighting these short-term wins, they see value in what's going on. And ultimately, focusing on short-term wins keeps the momentum of any change process going. So to wrap up today, good leadership is always combined with good management. I know we kind of parsed out in the chat at times management, but we recognize good leadership must be combined with good management. And sometimes that good leader and that good manager may not be the same person, and that's fine. It's about them working in tandem and working towards the change for the better. I'm going to jump to this last slide real quickly. And if you saw kind of any of the information about this, the title I kind of drew from this. Wicked is my favorite musical. I really, really love everything about it. And the song For Good that's in there, and if you've never listened to it, please listen to it. For Good from Wicked. It's kind of eerie and powerful. But Elphaba is one of the characters, and then Glinda is the other character, right? And so Elphaba is saying, I'm going to read these lyrics. I'm not going to sing them, so don't worry. But I'm just going to speak them. They kind of come off sing-songy in general. But she says, I'm limited. Just look at me. I'm limited. And just look at you. You can do all I couldn't do, Glinda. So now it's up to you for both of us. Now it's up to you. And Glinda goes on to say this. I've heard it said that people come into our lives for a reason, bringing something we must learn, and we are led to those who help us most to grow if we let them, and we help them in return. Well, I don't know if I believe that's true, but I know I am who I am today because I knew you. She goes on, like a comet pulled from orbit as it passes a sun, like a stream that meets a boulder halfway through the wood. Who can say I've been changed for the better? But because I knew you, I've been changed for good. Elphaba goes on in this, the musical, to say, it well may be that we will never meet again in this lifetime. So let me say before we part, so much of me is made of what I learned from you. You'll be with me like a handprint on my heart. And now whatever way our stories end, I know you have rewritten mine by being my friend. Like a ship blown from its mooring, like a wind by a wind off the sea, like a seed dropped by a skybird in a distant wood. Who can say if I've been changed for the better? But because I knew you, and Glinda goes on to say, because I knew you, and then they both say, I've been changed for good. It's a great song. I love the musical. But today, what I want to leave you with is I want to contend that we as human beings and as professionals in whatever industry you work in, I presume most of you maybe are coming from that public safety telecommunications background, to be the leader that you are designed to be the person who's going to make the difference, to be the difference that's happening in organizations, is all rooted and fostered in recognizing that we don't want to just be changed for good. We want to be changed for the better. We want to recognize that all of the processes of any change process that we talked about today is focused on leaving things better than we found them. If you know the story of the foundation, you know the strong emphasis they put on quality assurance and training and understanding what that looks like for those of us And oftentimes, to get to where we need to go in those areas, there's going to be a change process. So I want to challenge each and every one of you today, and hopefully you're willing to take this, is I want to challenge you to be content not with just changing for the good, but to focus on being changed for the better. We've got about 5 minutes left. If there's any questions or wonderings, I think someone raised their hand maybe to speak. Jennifer, if you had something, or maybe if that was an accident, I don't know how I can let you speak per se. But if you want to throw something in the chat, we would love to have that. But ultimately, I just want to see, are there any final questions, wonderings, thoughts, challenges? Push back. I'm not ashamed or offended. But I want to just also be a good steward of your time today. Thank you very much for being here. Don't forget to jump on those links. I know they threw them back at the beginning of the chat from the foundation. Register for Be the Difference in Knoxville. The link's there. And also don't forget that $20 off if you register by the end of July for the online course catalog. Lots of phenomenal content there. Any questions or wonderings? Thanks, Sherry. Yeah, it's one of those struggles. People keep things close to the chest. And sometimes, again, we can try to advocate for some of this positive change, even from being a second chair leader. You don't have to have the title. You don't have to have the position, the role, and you can still influence that positive change. So I'm glad this was helpful for you. Any other thoughts or questions? That's a great question, Halcyon. I like that. And hopefully we can leave that there. Are the people in your center changed for the better because they knew you? That's a big thing, and something to keep us mindful of, right? Very, very good. Halcyon, are you wanting book recommendations from me, or you're going to share? I obviously love Leading Change by John Kotter. That's something that I think has been foundational in what we talked about today. And I think it would be hugely successful or hugely impactful for all of you. I'm a big Simon Sinek fan, Brene Brown. I mean, I know you guys they're all names that you've heard, but for sure, Leading Change is one that was newer to me. When it comes to communication, which I think is one of the hard parts, John C. Maxwell has a great book on communication and what that looks like to communicate from your heart. This is the Leading Change book from Kotter, in case you want to see what it looks like. I don't really know why it has penguins on the front, but it's pretty impactful. And one of the cool things he's kind of done is added some fresh commentary on the end. And there's actually some follow-up books to that content as well. Good luck, Sherry. Those 12-hour shifts, huge. Yes, thank you. To quote Tracy Eldridge, you don't need me, we need each other. And I think that's what it comes back to. So yeah, that's great. Any other wonderings or anything? Otherwise, I can turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for doing that. That was awesome. And had such good engagement with this one too, which is awesome. I went ahead and dropped those links back in the chat just in case you needed it, as well as my email. In case you have any questions, you can email me and I can help you out. And then I also just wanted to give you a reminder that a replay link will be sent along with a certificate for this webinar. So thank you guys for coming, and we'll see you next time.